The cold iron of the auction block beneath Olivia Parker's bare feet sent a chill through her body that had nothing to do with the autumn wind whistling through the makeshift stage in Oklahoma City, 1873. She stood with her head high, refusing to let the crowd see her trembling, even as her father's final betrayal threatened to break her spirit completely. The auctioneer's voice boomed across the dusty town square. "Next up, a fine young woman to work your household or ranch. Strong, educated, and obedient. Bidding starts at $50 to cover the Parker debt." Olivia's eyes darted desperately through the crowd, searching for a friendly face, but found only strangers, most leering, some pitying, none offering salvation. Her father had gambled away their ranch, their cattle, and finally, in his desperation before fleeing west, he had sold the only thing he had left, his own daughter, to satisfy his creditors. Standing at the back of the crowd, Garrett Mitchell pulled his hat lower over his eyes. He'd ridden into Oklahoma City just that morning, hoping to find work before continuing on to Texas. At 30, he'd spent half his life working ranches across the frontier, saving every penny toward his dream of his own spread someday. Those savings weighed heavy in the pouch beneath his shirt. The crowd parted slightly, and he caught his first clear look at the woman on the block. Her honey-colored hair caught the sunlight, and though her simple dress was worn, she stood with the dignity of a queen. Something in her resolute posture, in the flash of defiance in her eyes even as she was being sold like cattle, stirred something in his chest. $60! Called a gruff voice. Garrett recognized the speaker, Bull Henderson, owner of the notorious Rattlesnake Saloon, known for working girls to death or worse. 75! Countered a rancher Garrett didn't recognize, his eyes calculating as he assessed Olivia like he might a workhorse. Garrett found himself moving forward before he'd made a conscious decision. $100, he called, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet square. The auctioneer beamed. 100 from the gentleman in the back. Do I hear 110? 150. Bull shot back, glaring at Garrett. Olivia's eyes found Garrett's across the crowd. There was no hope in them, just wary assessment. She'd learned not to hope. $200, Garrett said firmly. $250. Bull's face reddened with anger. Garrett stepped closer to the platform. $300. It was nearly every cent he had to his name. Bull Henderson spat in the dust. $325. The auctioneer's eyes gleamed with greed. $325 from Mr. Henderson. Going once, $350. Garrett said, his hand now empty of the money pouch, holding out every cent he possessed in this world. Bull Henderson cursed but shook his head and backed away. The other bidders remained silent. Sold. The auctioneer slammed his gavel. The girl goes to the Cowboy for $350. As Garrett approached the auction block, Olivia's eyes remained fixed on him, unreadable. The auctioneer handed him a bill of sale while an assistant guided Olivia down from the platform. Your property, sir, the assistant said with an obsequious smile. Garrett's jaw tightened. She's not property. He turned to Olivia, speaking low so only she could hear. Miss, I'm Garrett Mitchell. I don't aim to own you or harm you. I couldn't stand by and watch. He gestured toward Henderson. Why should I believe you? Olivia's voice was quiet but steady. What do you want from me? Garrett removed his hat. Nothing. I want nothing from you except to give you a chance. I'll work to pay off your debt, and you'll go free. I give you my word. Olivia's eyes narrowed. Men's promises don't mean much in my experience. Fair enough. Garrett nodded. You can judge me by my actions then. They walked in silence to the edge of town where Garrett's horse, a sturdy chestnut gelding, waited patiently. He helped Olivia mount before climbing up behind her. Where are we going? She asked, her body rigid with tension. Marshall Creek Ranch, Garrett replied. I know the owner, Walter Simmons. Good man. He's been looking for help, and I can work there to earn back what I paid. Once that's done, you're free to go wherever you choose. And until then? Until then, to everyone else, you're working as the ranch cook to pay off your father's debt. But between us, you're not obligated to me for anything." Olivia remained silent as they rode out of town, the future as uncertain as the vast Oklahoma plains stretching before them. The Marshall Creek Ranch sprawled across 5,000 acres of prime grazing land 15 miles outside Oklahoma City. The main house stood on a gentle rise overlooking corrals and outbuildings, with bunkhouses for the hands set apart from the main residence. Walter Simmons, a barrel-chested man in his 50s with a silver-streaked beard, met them at the corral fence. His weathered face crinkled with surprise. "Garrett Mitchell! Thought you were headed to Texas." "Change of plans, Walter." Garrett dismounted and helped Olivia down. "This is Miss Olivia Parker. We need work, both of us." Walter's shrewd eyes took in the situation: Olivia's tense posture, the way she stood slightly apart, the protective stance Garrett had unconsciously adopted. "Your timing's good," Walter said finally. "Lost my cook last month, and we're short-handed with the herd. Fall roundup starts next week." He tipped his hat to Olivia. "Madam, if you can boil water without burning it, you'd be a sight better than what my boys have managed." "I can cook, Mr. Simmons," Olivia said quietly. "Good enough then. Garrett, you know where the bunkhouse is. Miss Parker can take the small cabin behind the main house. Used to be for the housekeeper before my Margaret passed on." That evening, after showing Olivia to her cabin, a modest but clean single room with a bed, table, and small stove, Garrett brought her supper from the bunkhouse. "I know this isn't ideal," he said, setting down the plate of beans and biscuits, "but it's temporary." Olivia stood by the window, arms wrapped around herself. "How long?" Garrett calculated quickly. $350. At cowhand wages, maybe a year. Less if I can pick up extra work. "A year?" She turned to face him. "And I'm just supposed to trust that you'll honor this arrangement? That you won't change your mind?" "I've never broken my word, Miss Parker. My father said the same, until debt and drink got the better of him." She finally met his eyes directly. "I'll cook for the ranch as Mr. Simmons requested, but I want our arrangement in writing." Garrett nodded slowly. "That's fair. I'll draw up something tomorrow. And I want to know exactly how much you've worked off, every month." "Done." Olivia's shoulders relaxed slightly. "Thank you for what you did today, Mr. Mitchell. Even if I don't understand why you did it." Garrett paused at the door. "Some things a man just can't stand by and watch, Miss Parker. Get some rest. Kitchen duties start early." The first light of dawn found Olivia already in the ranch kitchen, taking inventory of supplies and planning meals for the dozen ranch hands. Cooking for large groups wasn't new to her. She'd managed their ranch household since her mother died when she was 16. That had been 4 years ago, before her father's gambling had spiraled out of control. By the time the ranch hands filed in for breakfast, she had biscuits, gravy, and eggs waiting. The men entered warily, curious about the new cook, but their skepticism vanished after the first bites. "Miss Parker," drawled an older cowboy with a gray-streaked mustache, "I believe you just saved us all from starvation." A chorus of agreements followed. Olivia nodded acknowledgement, but her eyes sought out Garrett, who entered last. He'd been up since before dawn, she knew, helping with the early chores. Their gazes met briefly before she turned back to her work. Over the next weeks, Olivia settled into a routine. Up at dawn to prepare breakfast, then baking bread and planning dinner while the men were out working. Sometimes she caught glimpses of Garrett riding out with the others, always the first to leave and the last to return. He kept his distance, careful never to be alone with her except for their monthly accounting, when he would solemnly report how much of the debt he had worked off. $40 this month, he told her one evening in late October, as they sat at the small table in her cabin, the door left conspicuously open. "Walter gave me extra for breaking those Mustangs that came in." Olivia made a note in the small ledger she kept. "That leaves $310. Garrett nodded. "The winter cattle drive to the railhead starts next week. Walter's offering a bonus if we get the herd there before the first heavy snow. You're working yourself to exhaustion, Olivia observed quietly. Garrett shrugged. I've known worse. An awkward silence fell between them. After a moment, Olivia spoke again. The men talk about you, you know. They say you're the best horseman they've seen. That you could be foreman on any ranch in the territory. Maybe someday. Garrett stood to leave. Is there anything you need, Miss Parker? Their conversations always ended this way, formal, distant, careful. But this time, Olivia didn't let it pass. Yes, she said suddenly. I need to understand why you're doing this. The truth, Mr. Mitchell. Garrett paused, his hand on the doorframe. For a long moment, he said nothing, and Olivia thought he might leave without answering. Finally, he turned back. My mother was sold to settle a debt when I was 10 years old, he said quietly. I never saw her again. No one should be treated as property, Miss Parker. Not ever. Before she could respond, he was gone, leaving Olivia staring at the empty doorway, her ledger forgotten on the table. The cattle drive took the men away for 3 weeks. In their absence, the ranch fell quiet, with only Olivia, Walter, and 2 older hands who remained behind to tend to the homestead. She used the time to deep clean the kitchen, mend linens, and prepare for the men's return by storing up baked goods and planning hearty meals for hungry cowboys. On the night the drive returned, a fierce storm blew in from the north. Olivia stood on her cabin porch, watching lightning split the sky and counting the seconds until thunder followed. The rain came in sheets, turning the ranch yard to mud within minutes. Through the downpour, she saw riders approaching the cattle drive returning. They came in a bedraggled line, slumped in their saddles after weeks of hard work and the final push through the storm. Olivia hurried to the main house kitchen to prepare hot coffee and food. The men staggered in, dripping water and mud, too exhausted even for their usual banter. Walter came in beaming despite his sodden state. Best price in 3 years, he announced. You boys earned every cent of your bonus. Olivia scanned the group, looking for Garrett, but didn't see him among the weary faces. A knot of worry formed in her stomach. Where's Mr. Mitchell? She asked, trying to sound casual as she poured coffee. The smile faded from Walter's face. He stayed back with a couple of the boys. One of the younger hands got thrown when lightning spooked his horse. Busted his leg bad. Garrett's bringing him in on a travois, moving slow. In this storm? Olivia looked toward the windows, where rain lashed against the glass. Garrett wouldn't leave him, said one of the cowboys. Said he'd get Jim home safe or die trying. Olivia spent the next hours in anxious waiting, keeping coffee hot and food warm as the ranch hands dried out and settled in. Outside, the storm showed no signs of abating, with wind howling around the eaves and rain beating a constant rhythm on the roof. It was well past midnight when shouts from the yard alerted everyone to riders approaching. Olivia rushed to the door with the others. Through the rain, she could make out 3 riders, 2 on horseback, flanking a 3rd horse that pulled an improvised travois. The men hurried out to help. They carried young Jim, pale and groaning, into the main house where Walter's bedroom had been prepared. The ranch owner had some medical knowledge from his army days and set about examining the boy's broken leg. Olivia's eyes searched for Garrett and found him last to enter, supporting another cowboy who limped badly. Both men were drenched to the skin, caked with mud, and swaying with exhaustion. Once he'd helped his companion to a chair, Garrett himself seemed to run out of strength. He leaned heavily against the wall, eyes half closed. Without thinking, Olivia went to his side. You're dead on your feet, she said softly. Garrett managed a weary smile. Not dead yet. Come on. You need to get dry and warm. To her surprise, he didn't argue, allowing her to lead him to the kitchen where the large stove kept the room warm. The other hands were occupied with Jim, or had already staggered off to the bunkhouse, leaving them momentarily alone. Olivia poured hot coffee laced with whiskey and pressed it into his shaking hands. Drink this. Then you need to get out of those wet clothes before you catch your death. Garrett obeyed, gulping the fortified coffee. Some color returned to his face, but he still shivered violently. "Can you make it to the bunkhouse?" she asked. Garrett looked toward the window where rain still pelted down. "Probably," he said, though he sounded doubtful. Olivia made a quick decision. "My cabin's closer. You can dry off there, and I'll find you some blankets." His eyes, clouded with exhaustion, met hers. "People will talk. People always talk," she replied firmly. "I'm more concerned about pneumonia. Come on." They dashed through the rain to her cabin, where Olivia quickly built up the fire in her small stove. She rummaged through a trunk and produced a large woolen blanket. "I'll step outside while you get those wet things off," she said, heading for the door. "No." Garrett caught her arm. "You'll be soaked again. Just turn around." Olivia faced the wall, listening to the sounds of sodden clothing hitting the floor. She swallowed hard, suddenly acutely aware of his presence, of the small space they shared. "Decent now," he said after a moment. She turned to find him with the blanket wrapped around his waist, his chest bare. In the lamplight, she could see scars crisscrossing his torso, evidence of a hard life on the frontier. Despite his exhaustion, the lean muscle of a working cowboy was evident. Olivia felt heat rising to her cheeks and busied herself hanging his wet clothes near the stove. "Sit by the fire," she instructed. "I'll make you something hot to eat." "You don't have to take care of me," Garrett protested weakly, but he sank onto the chair she indicated. "You spent the last 6 hours taking care of Jim," she countered, stirring up a quick batch of oatmeal sweetened with molasses. "Someone needs to take care of you." While the oatmeal cooked, she draped another blanket around his shoulders. Her fingers brushed his skin, and she was alarmed at how cold he still felt. "You're like ice," she murmured. "Been wetter and colder," he said, but his teeth chattered as he spoke. Impulsively, Olivia took his hands between hers, rubbing them to restore circulation. Only when warmth began returning to his fingers did she realize the intimacy of the gesture. She started to pull away, but Garrett gently tightened his hold. "Thank you," he said quietly. His eyes, clear now despite his fatigue, held hers. Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition, a possibility either had acknowledged before. Then the oatmeal bubbled over, breaking the spell, and Olivia hurried to rescue their supper. They ate in companionable silence. When Garrett had finished, exhaustion overtook him completely. His eyes drifted shut even as he sat upright in the chair. "You need to sleep," Olivia said softly. "I'll go to the bunkhouse." But he made no move to rise. "Don't be foolish. You can hardly stand." She hesitated, then continued firmly. "Take the bed. I'll sleep in the chair." "I can't put you out of your bed, Miss Parker." "Olivia," she said suddenly. "After all this time, I think you might call me Olivia." A smile touched his lips. "Olivia." The way he said her name sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the cold. "And I'm Garrett. But I still can't take your bed." "Then we're at an impasse, because I won't let you go back out in that storm, and you're about to fall over." In the end, they compromised. Olivia took the bed while Garrett made a pallet on the floor nearby with spare blankets. The arrangement was scandalous by the standards of proper society, but out here on the frontier, practical concerns often outweighed convention. Still, Olivia lay awake for some time, acutely aware of his presence just a few feet away. "Garrett?" she whispered, unsure if he was still awake. "Hmm?" came his drowsy response. "Thank you for everything." There was a moment of silence then. "You're worth it, Olivia Parker." She fell asleep with those words echoing in her mind. Morning came with clearing skies and awkward awareness. Garrett woke at dawn, dressed quickly in his now dry clothes, and slipped out while Olivia pretended to sleep, both of them silently agreeing to act as if the night's unusual arrangements had never happened. But something had changed. In the days that followed, a new warmth colored their interactions. Garrett began taking his meals at the kitchen table rather than with the men, helping Olivia with dishes afterward. Their conversations, once limited to formal accounting of her debt, expanded to include stories from their pasts, hopes for the future, observations about books they'd read. The other ranch hands noticed the change, of course. Knowing glances and good-natured teasing followed Garrett, though never where Olivia might hear. Walter Simmons observed the developing situation with thoughtful eyes but said nothing. November brought an early cold snap, freezing the ponds and painting the mornings with frost. Garrett continued to work tirelessly, taking on extra tasks around the ranch, even riding into Oklahoma City on his day off to help the blacksmith for additional pay. "Another $60 this month," he told Olivia during their accounting session in early December. "That brings the total down to $250. Olivia set down her pencil. "At this rate, you're going to work yourself into an early grave before the debt is paid." Garrett shrugged. "Winter's a good time for extra work. Not as much to do with the herds." Olivia hesitated, then asked the question that had been on her mind. "What will you do after? When the debt is paid?" His eyes met hers. "That depends." "On what?" "On what you want to do. Where you want to go." The implication hung in the air between them. Olivia's heart quickened. "I haven't thought that far ahead." "Haven't you?" His voice was gentle. Before she could answer, a knock at the open door interrupted them. Walter Simmons stood there, looking uncharacteristically solemn. "Sorry to interrupt, but there's a visitor at the main house asking for Miss Parker. Says he's her uncle." Olivia stiffened. "I don't have an uncle." Walter nodded grimly. "Figured as much. He's got papers, though. Claims your father signed over your guardianship to him before he died." "My father is dead?" The words seemed to come from far away. "According to this fellow. Name's James Parker. Says your pa died in Denver last month." Olivia's mind raced. Her father had had a cousin named James, a man she met only once, years ago. A man her mother had forbidden from their home. Garrett was on his feet. "I'll come with you." James Parker was a well-dressed man in his 40s, with a waxed mustache and cold eyes that didn't match his solicitous smile. He rose when Olivia entered the main house parlor, Garrett and Walter following close behind. "My dear niece," he exclaimed, moving as if to embrace her. Olivia stepped back. "We're cousins, not uncle and niece, Mr. Parker. And we've met exactly once, when I was 14. His smile tightened. "Nevertheless, family is family. I've come to take you home, now that your poor father has passed." "Home where?" "I've established myself in Denver. A successful business, a fine home. You'll want for nothing." Olivia crossed her arms. "I have employment here." James Parker's gaze flicked dismissively around the room. "A ranch cook? Hardly suitable for a young lady of your background." He produced a folded document from his breast pocket. "Your father signed guardianship over to me before his unfortunate passing. You're barely 20, Olivia. The law recognizes you need guidance." Garrett stepped forward. "Miss Parker isn't available to leave." Parker's eyes narrowed as he assessed Garrett. "And you are?" "Garrett Mitchell. Miss Parker is working here to pay off a debt." "Ah, yes. My cousin's gambling problems." Parker smiled thinly. "I'm prepared to settle any outstanding amounts, of course." Walter Simmons, who had been quietly observing, finally spoke. "Perhaps Miss Parker would like time to consider her options. It's getting late. Why don't you stay in town tonight, Mr. Parker, and return tomorrow?" Parker looked as if he might object, but finally nodded. "Very well. I'll return at noon tomorrow. Be ready to leave, Olivia." He tipped his hat and departed. As soon as he was gone, Olivia sank into a chair. "My father is dead." Walter excused himself tactfully, leaving her alone with Garrett. He knelt beside her chair. "I'm sorry about your father," he said gently. "I don't know what to feel," she admitted. "He sold me to pay his debts." "But he was still my father. Do you want to go with Parker?" "No." The vehemence of her response surprised even her. There was something wrong about him. My mother never explained why, but she wouldn't let him in our house. Then you won't go, Garrett said firmly. Your debt is to me, not him. He can't force you. But that document may not even be legal. And even if it is, we'll find a way around it. Olivia studied his face. Why do you care what happens to me? Garrett met her gaze steadily. You know why. The admission, simple as it was, changed everything. Olivia reached out and touched his cheek. Yes. I think I do. That night, Olivia couldn't sleep. Her mind raced with thoughts of her father's death, James Parker's unexpected appearance, and most of all, the unspoken feelings growing between her and Garrett. Near dawn, a soft knock at her door startled her fully awake. It was Garrett, already dressed for riding, his expression grave. We need to go. Now. What's happened? Walter rode into town last night to ask about Parker. He's not who he claims to be. His real name is James Blackwell, and he's been trafficking young women to mining camps up north. Olivia felt cold dread wash over her. How do you know? The sheriff recognized his description. He's wanted in 3 states. Walter sent a message with one of the hands. Parker Blackwell must have been tipped off, because he left the hotel before the sheriff got there. He could be on his way here now. Olivia was already moving, grabbing essentials and stuffing them into a bag. Where will we go? I have a friend with a small ranch near the Kansas border. We can lie low there until this is sorted out. Within minutes, they were mounted and riding north, the pre-dawn light barely enough to see the trail. They rode hard through the morning, stopping only briefly to rest the horses. By midday, they had covered nearly 20 miles, following game trails and stream beds to avoid the main roads. We should be safe to rest a while, Garrett said as they reached a small wooded area beside a creek. The horses need it. While the horses drank, Olivia and Garrett shared the bread and cheese she'd hastily packed. They sat side by side against a tree trunk, the tension of their flight gradually easing. I'm sorry about your father, Garrett said after a while. Olivia sighed. I mourned him years ago, when the drinking took him. The man who sold me to pay his debts wasn't the father I knew. Still. She nodded, acknowledging the complex grief. Thank you for coming for me. For warning me about Parker. I promise to keep you safe. His eyes met hers. I intend to keep that promise. The intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Garrett leaned closer. Their lips met in a kiss that began tentatively but quickly deepened with months of unspoken longing. His hand came up to cradle her face, and Olivia leaned into his touch, her heart pounding. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Garrett rested his forehead against hers. I've wanted to do that for a very long time. Why didn't you? I needed you to be sure. To know you were choosing freely, not out of obligation. Olivia's hand found his. I choose you, Garrett Mitchell. Not because of any debt, but because of who you are. They might have remained there longer, but the sound of approaching riders shattered the moment. Garrett was on his feet instantly, pulling Olivia up with him. Into the trees. He whispered urgently. Quick! They retreated into the denser woods, leading their horses. Through the foliage, they could make out 3 riders following the creek, James Blackwell and 2 rough-looking men. He's tracking us, Garrett murmured. We need to move. Now. They circled deeper into the woods, moving as quietly as possible, putting distance between themselves and their pursuers. Once they felt it was safe, they mounted again and rode hard, pushing northeast toward the Kansas border. As dusk approached, they spotted a small homestead in the distance, a modest cabin with smoke rising from the chimney, a barn, and fenced pastures. My friend Tom's place, Garrett explained as they approached. He was in my unit during the war. Tom Wheaton proved to be a burly, bearded man with a booming laugh and a warm welcome. His wife Sarah, a petite woman with kind eyes, immediately took Olivia under her wing. You poor dear, you must be exhausted, she fussed, leading Olivia inside while Tom and Garrett tended the horses. Over a simple but hearty dinner, Garrett explained their situation. Tom listened gravely, then nodded. "You're welcome to stay as long as needed. I was heading into town tomorrow anyway. I'll let the sheriff know Blackwell's in the area." "Thank you," Olivia said sincerely. "Any friend of Garrett's is family to us," Sarah replied with a meaningful glance between Olivia and Garrett. "Now Olivia can share the spare room with our daughter Emma, and Garrett, you can bunk in with our boy in the loft." That night, lying in the narrow bed she shared with 10-year-old Emma, Olivia finally allowed herself to truly process everything: her father's death, the threat of Blackwell, and most confusingly wonderful, the kiss she'd shared with Garrett. For the first time in months, despite the dangers still pursuing them, she felt something like hope blossoming in her heart. Morning brought snow, the first real snowfall of the season, blanketing the countryside in white. Tom delayed his trip to town, unwilling to risk the weather, which meant they were temporarily isolated at the homestead. The forced confinement created a strange bubble of domesticity. Olivia helped Sarah with household chores and cooking, while Garrett and Tom repaired storm damage to the barn. The children, Emma and 8-year-old Matthew, were delighted by the unexpected visitors and the adventure of being snowed in. On the third day, during a lull in the snowfall, Garrett asked Olivia to walk with him. They bundled up against the cold and strolled along the edge of the property, their boots crunching in the fresh snow. "Walter will be worried," Olivia said, breaking the comfortable silence. "Tom's sending a message when he gets to town. Walter's a good man. He'll understand." They stopped by a frozen pond, the surface glittering in the winter sunlight. Garrett turned to face her, his expression serious. "Olivia, there's something I need to tell you. About your debt." Her heart sank a little. Always it came back to the debt. "Walter paid me a bonus for the cattle drive. With what I've saved, and some extra I had put aside." He took a deep breath. "The debt is paid. You're free." Olivia stared at him. "Paid? All of it?" Garrett nodded. "All $350. You can go wherever you want now. Do whatever you choose." Just like that? A strange mix of emotions washed over her: relief, certainly, but also an unexpected sense of loss. The debt had been the thread connecting them. Without it. Just like that. He confirmed, his eyes searching hers. "You're beholden to no one now, Olivia Parker." She took a step closer to him. "And if what I choose is to stay with you?" Hope flared in his eyes. "Is that what you want?" "It is." She reached for his hand. "Not because of any debt or obligation, but because somewhere along the way, I fell in love with you, Garrett Mitchell." Joy transformed his face. He pulled her into his arms, lifting her off her feet in an embrace that stole her breath. "I love you, Olivia Parker," he whispered against her hair. "Have almost from the first moment I saw you." Their kiss this time was uninhibited, filled with promise and passion, the cold forgotten in the warmth they created between them. When they finally broke apart, Garrett kept her close in the circle of his arms. "I don't have much to offer yet," he said. "But I've been saving for years. Enough for a small spread of my own someday. It wouldn't be grand, but—" Olivia pressed her fingers to his lips, stopping his words. "I don't need grand. I just need you." They returned to the house hand in hand, their future uncertain but their path decided. They would face it together. 2 days later, Tom finally made it to town and returned with news. The sheriff had organized a posse that tracked and captured James Blackwell and his companions trying to cross into Indian territory. They would face trial for numerous charges, including kidnapping and fraud. "The sheriff says you're welcome to come back whenever you're ready," Tom told them. "And he sent this." He handed Garrett a telegram from Walter Simmons. "Walter offers us both our jobs back," Garrett read aloud. "And—" his eyes widened. "He's offering to sell us a parcel of his land on generous terms. Says he's getting too old to manage the whole spread anyway." Olivia's heart leaped. "Our own ranch? A start." Garrett said, his eyes shining. We'd have to work hard. Build everything from scratch. I'm not afraid of hard work. She squeezed his hand. When can we start? The return to Marshall Creek Ranch a week later was met with celebration. The hands had organized a welcome dinner, complete with a cake Sarah Wheaton had sent along. Walter Simmons embraced them both, clearly relieved at their safe return. Later that evening, Walter showed them the land he was offering, 500 acres on the eastern boundary of his property, with good water access and mixed grazing and timber land. The price he named was far below its value, with terms spread over 10 years. Consider it a wedding present, Walter said with a wink. Assuming that's where this is headed. Garrett looked at Olivia, a question in his eyes. She nodded, smiling. It is, Garrett confirmed. If she'll have me. I will, Olivia said simply. They were married the following spring in a ceremony attended by the entire ranch. Tom and Sarah Wheaton made the journey with their children, and even the sheriff came, bringing news that James Blackwell had been sentenced to 20 years in prison for his crimes. Their first year on their own land was hard, as they'd known it would be. They started with a one-room cabin Garrett built with help from the Marshall Creek hands, a small herd of cattle Walter provided as part of their deal, and endless determination. Olivia planted a vegetable garden and kept chickens, while Garrett worked their land and still took occasional jobs at neighboring ranches for extra cash. By their first anniversary, they had expanded the cabin to 3 rooms, increased their herd, and Olivia was expecting their first child. Standing on the porch of their home one evening, Garrett wrapped his arms around her from behind, his hands resting gently on her growing belly. Are you happy, Olivia Mitchell? He murmured against her ear. She leaned back against him, watching the sunset paint their land in gold. Happier than I ever dreamed possible. No regrets? This life is harder than what you knew before. Olivia turned in his arms. My only regret would have been never finding you. She reached up to touch his face, marveling still at the twist of fate that had brought them together. From an auction block to this. Who could have imagined? I think I knew even then, Garrett said softly. Something in me recognized something in you. Like my soul had been waiting for yours. She kissed him then, this man who had worked off every cent of her debt, but had given her something far more valuable, freedom to choose her own path, and the love to walk it alongside her. Their son, William Thomas Mitchell, was born that winter, a strong, healthy boy with his father's eyes and his mother's determined spirit. Olivia recovered quickly from the birth, and by spring was back to helping with ranch chores, baby William strapped to her back or napping in a basket nearby as she worked. The following years brought growth and prosperity. Their herd expanded, and they were able to hire 2 hands to help with the increasing workload. They added rooms to the house as their family grew. A daughter, Margaret Sarah, joined them 2 years after William, followed by another son, Henry Walter, 18 months later. Garrett proved to be a natural rancher, with an instinct for breeding stock and managing the land. When a severe drought hit the territory in their 5th year, their careful water management and diverse herds allowed them to weather it better than many larger operations. Neighboring ranchers began to seek Garrett's advice, and his reputation grew. Olivia discovered talents of her own beyond homemaking. She had a head for figures and began keeping not only their own books but eventually helping other small ranchers organize their finances. She started a small school in their front room, teaching their children and those of neighboring homesteads basic reading, writing, and arithmetic. On the 10th anniversary of the day Garrett had first seen Olivia on the auction block, they held a celebration at their now thriving ranch. Friends from miles around gathered for a day of feasting and dancing in the large barn they built the previous year. Walter Simmons, now in his 70s but still spry, was the guest of honor. As twilight fell and lanterns were lit for the dancing, Garrett pulled Olivia away from the festivities, leading her to the quiet hilltop overlooking their land. In the valley below, their ranch spread out before them, the main house with its welcoming porch, the barns and corrals, pastures dotted with cattle, the small schoolhouse they built the previous summer, and in the distance, the cabins where their ranch hands lived. Do you remember what I promised you that first day? Garrett asked, his arm around her waist. Olivia leaned into him. You said you'd work off my debt, and I'd go free. And here we are, 10 years later. He gestured to the thriving ranch below them. You never left. I did go free. She corrected him gently. Free to choose the life I wanted. Free to love the man I wanted. She turned to face him. Every day with you has been my choice, Garrett. Every single one. He kissed her then, with the same tenderness he'd shown when they'd first declared their love in the snow outside the Wheatons' homestead. When they parted, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. I've been saving again, he said with a smile. For something I should have given you years ago. Inside the box was a gold ring set with a small but perfect diamond. Olivia gasped softly. We never had a proper engagement, Garrett explained. You deserve better than a hasty proposal while on the run. Our beginning was unusual, Olivia agreed, her eyes shining as he slipped the ring onto her finger alongside her simple gold wedding band. But I wouldn't change a moment of it. Nor would I. He looked out over their land again. From $350 to all this. Sometimes I can hardly believe it. It wasn't the money that built this, Olivia said. It was your promise. Your integrity. Your love. They rejoined the celebration hand in hand, their hearts full with the life they had created together. As they danced under the stars, surrounded by friends and family, Olivia thought of the frightened young woman she had been on that auction block, and the brave Cowboy who had changed her fate with a bid and a promise. Some debts could never truly be repaid, but some, like the debt of love between them, were a joy to spend a lifetime honoring. In the spring of their 15th year on the ranch, now known throughout the territory as the Promised Land Ranch, they received a letter that brought the past rushing back. It was from a lawyer in Denver, informing them that James Blackwell had died in prison. Surprisingly, he had left a confession and a will, naming Olivia as the beneficiary of a small sum money he claimed had originally belonged to her father. Blood money, Garrett said grimly after reading the letter. We don't need it. Olivia was quiet for a long moment, then said, No, we don't need it. But I know what we could do with it. The money, when it came, went to establish a fund at the Territorial Bank. The Olivia and Garrett Mitchell Foundation would provide interest-free loans to help young men and women start their own ranches or businesses, particularly those who, like Olivia once had, found themselves at the mercy of circumstances beyond their control. The first recipient was a young woman whose husband had been killed in a ranch accident, leaving her with 3 small children and a mountain of debt. With the foundation's help, she established a successful millinery shop in Oklahoma City. Full circle, Garrett observed as they watched her open her shop. From debt to freedom. Olivia squeezed his hand. The greatest gift you ever gave me. As they rode home that day, side by side as they had been for 15 years, Olivia looked over at the man who had once spent his life's savings to save a stranger. The years had added silver to his temples and lines around his eyes, but to her, he was more handsome than ever, for she could see in his face not just the Cowboy who had bid for her that day, but the husband who had stood beside her through childbirth and drought, triumph and hardship, every day a renewed choice to love and be loved. What are you thinking about? Garrett asked, catching her gaze. Olivia smiled. About debts paid and promises kept. Any regrets? It was a question he still asked sometimes, as if amazed by his good fortune. Not one, she answered truthfully. Every cent was worth it. Their children were nearly grown now, William preparing to attend college back east, Margaret showing her father's gift with horses and her mother's head for business, and Henry already talking of his own ranch someday. The Promised Land Ranch had grown to over 2,000 acres, with a reputation for the finest cattle and horses in the territory. What had begun as desperation, a young woman on an auction block, a cowboy with every penny to his name, had blossomed into a legacy that would endure for generations. That night, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the western sky, Garrett took Olivia's hand in his thumb brushing over the rings he'd given her. You know, he said thoughtfully, I never did tell you the complete truth about why I bid for you that day. Olivia turned to him in surprise. You said it was because of your mother. That was part of it, he acknowledged. But there was something else. The moment I saw you standing there, so proud even in those terrible circumstances, something inside me just knew. Knew what? His eyes, still as blue and direct as the day they'd met, held hers. That you were my future. That whatever it cost me, you were worth it. Tears welled in Olivia's eyes. And was I? Worth every cent? Garrett's answer was to pull her close, his kiss as tender as their first yet deepened by years of shared love and life. Every cent, he whispered against her lips. And I'd pay it all again for just one day with you, Olivia Mitchell. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, they remained on the porch, talking softly of tomorrow and all the tomorrows yet to come, each one a gift, each one a choice, each one another payment on the debt of love that had transformed two strangers at an auction block into partners in a life neither could have imagined, but both had helped create, scent by precious scent.